This video is about sudden personality change. It's been bothering me all day. I woke up, didn't exactly wake up. When I tried to wake up, I felt like I was still in a dream, and I realized now I was having flashbacks. My life has had so much trauma that I do suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, and I go into flashbacks. And particularly if somebody is abusive to me, but this is about. I feel I got to share this because I went through these horrendous flashbacks, and it was about people that I loved who suddenly changed and became somebody else right before my eyes, and that's very traumatic. And I'm not talking about a dual personality like Jekyll Hyde, like my father. He was wonderful until the age of 7, and then he turned into this monster. But behind the scenes, he was beating up on my mother. And at the age of 7, I went into the library. I was a good reader. I was sick as hell and in pain all the time and crippling, but I started at 6 years old. I now know I have Parkinsonism. I was poisoned as a child, and you can either acquire it through being poisoned, or you can have it genetically passed to you, a chemical hypersensitivity. And anyway, it's neither here nor there. I went into the library, and I wanted to understand why my father was so crazy, and I felt my mother was just as crazy because she didn't do a thing to stop the violence. He went to beat up on my brother and was smacking his head, and I was terrified he'd cause brain damage because I was a big reader. I was a pretty smart kid. So I jumped on him like a wild alley cat and wrapped my arms and legs around him and bit. And he was bleeding, and I wouldn't let go. And he's screaming to my mother to get her to let go, and my mother finally said, well, you'll have to promise not to hurt her, because she was only protecting her brother. And finally he said to me, I promise, I promise. And I must say, even though my father was such a sociopath, if he gave his word, that was the one thing he would do. But getting him to give his word was usually very difficult. I don't know why that was a thing with him, but it was. And anyway, make a long story short, he got help from the doctor because they recognized that the bite marks were mine. And throughout my life, that's what he was. Sometimes he'd be really wonderful, and then he'd, one of the very first memories I have is he attempted to beat me up because I was eating my potatoes too slow. Any excuse would do. He would fly into these fits of rage, and he just cruel, really cruel. The last thing he did when he was dying was make sure that he made a will that was cruel, that would cause me grief for the rest of my life. And it's 18 years later, and I'm still at it. He got his wish. But also men like him, for the 2 years he was dating my mother, he was Mr. Wonderful. So I'm not talking about people like that. They're cons, okay? Basically, they're not nice people. They're going to beat you up. And I had certainly more than my fair share of men like that in my life. One held me hostage for 5 months, and I won't go into that. I put that in my biography because it's just too graphic and too brutal what he did to me. And I still have physical damage and nerve damage from what he did. But anyway, that's a whole different character. And it's not learned behavior. That's bullshit. His father never beat up on the children, and he was beating up on his sisters when he was very young, with the permission of his mother. His mother was as bad as my mother, although my mother didn't get permission. She was just incompetent. I later found out that she suffered from what you call wife battering, and so she would support the enemy, and I was never able to break her free of that. But I'm talking about people who suddenly, like that, right before your eyes, become somebody else. And aside from being tortured, which I was that 5 months, I I got to tell you, it's the most traumatic experience, and it's very difficult to get over it. And so this morning, because this most recent episode, it started 6 months ago, and I'm still really in shock, and I'm traumatized by it. And I'm going, why me? I've had this happen to me several times in my life. Why me? And then I thought, no, I'm going to share this because I can't be the only one who's gone through this. Now, people who have Alzheimer's will have personality changes. Not always, but sometimes. And that's really traumatic because the person you've loved becomes somebody else. But that's not the only way it happens. I'm going to share the different men in my life and what caused it to happen. My childhood best friend said things about me that were very sexist. And I turned on him, unplugged the phone, never talked to him again. And I regret that because he was just, it was locker room talk and he was being stupid. I should have confronted the situation and talked it out, and we probably would have remained friends the rest of our lives. But I think partly because of the violence that I grew up in, I couldn't deal with it. I just couldn't deal with it. And I shut him down. And maybe he should have tried harder. I don't know. Maybe I wasn't that important to him. Maybe he was more important to me than I was to him because he was my protector. And he took care of me throughout all my life. We were babies together and at the same age, and he protected me all the time and watched over me and made sure that even though I crippled, I got exercise. And so I have such wonderful memories of him, and I really regret the loss of that friendship. But, and yeah, I've definitely made mistakes, in my life. But when I recognized it as I got older, I always tried to make amends or try to deal with it somehow. But I can't always. The first experience that was of this sudden personality disorder was in my dear, dear beloved Ronnie Harding. And it was years later that I was able to figure out, because his ex-wife, he had annulled the marriage because he couldn't consummate it. And it turned out it was because of drugs. Because, I'm talking the 60s, and people were using all kinds of stupid drugs. And it did affect their ability to perform in the bedroom. But he was so traumatized. This was the love of his life. And he felt he had to set her free. He was gripped with self-loathing and self-destruction. And he just wanted her to set her free. So he insisted, and he filed for an annulment. And boy, she and I cried together a few times over that one. And although I did try to stay friends with him, he refused to talk to her, so I stayed friends with him. But the change in him was just a nightmare. And it was alcohol and drugs that caused it. And I've been doing some reading that they say that a chemical imbalance in the brain is false and there's no such thing. Well, they're full of shit, man. Okay, drugs, if you take drugs and you wind up with a chemical imbalance, trust me, antidepressants and more drugs is not going to cure the problem. You got to go clean, you got to go sober, you got to go into treatment, and then you may have ongoing personality disorder and dysfunction because you've now got some form of mental illness from what you've done to yourself and to others. So it takes time to repair all that. I'm an alcoholic, 34 years sober, and I went into AA and then NA, and I didn't do drugs, but I just, that's me. I'm overkill. I'm going to do everything. I did adult children and alcoholics, which in my personal experience was the most beneficial for me because of the alcoholism in the family tree and the dysfunction in the family home and the violence. So that really helped me a lot. It didn't cure me, okay? I have an allergy to alcohol and I cannot drink safely. And I'm not using that as a catchphrase. Listen, one drink and I was out of control and I woke up in New York. One drink and I was out of control and I came to 2.5 months later in Vancouver and a lesbian biker gang was feeding me chicken soup. So, excuse me, that is not normal alcoholism. I have a definite allergy. And I was never safe. Never. From the first drink when I was 17 to the last. I was completely out of control. And I did some really crazy things. 2 weddings, no marriages. Yeah. Ha. So anyway, so the first one was Ronnie Harding. And when I sobered up, we met at a bar. He called me, he'd heard that I sobered up. And he wanted to give me a hug and say God bless. And he was happy for me. And he hoped that I would stay with it. And he said he was dying. He had cirrhosis of the liver and he couldn't wait to die. So that's why he wasn't quitting drinking. But, you know, that was 1964, 65, when he had this personality change. And this was 1984. Took him a long time to die. God, that's not a way to go. The next one was Tom Murphy. I met him in 1984 and 85 in AA, along with my current partner, Dan McIsaac. And I took a paralyzing attack at a meeting, and they both proceeded from that day on to help me and take care of me. A lot like my childhood sweetheart did. Protect me and look after me and make sure that I got home safely and stuff like that. And when a doctor tried to murder me, and that's not a joke, it happened, total maniac, you know, not all doctors are nice guys, and the police wouldn't charge him, Tom Murphy took a leave of absence to take care of me and to help me research my disease. And our relationship was really, really special. When I take an attack, the pain is like being electrocuted, and all he had to do was hug me, and the pain went down. The pain just completely subsided, and he would rock me until I'd fall asleep. And it was a completely celibate, loving, wonderful relationship. And then one day, right before my eyes, he cursed at me and swore at me, and he called me names, and he became somebody else. And he hated me. He absolutely hated me. And there was nothing I could do. I later discovered that doctors had given him a drug for muscle relaxant or something. He'd had an injury in the mind. And that's what happened. I found out that drug was banned in the United States because a man who was a famous author, I don't even remember his name, so I'm sorry I can't tell you, but he went on that drug and he murdered his wife. And it was because of this something that it does to your brain. So this can happen from drugs. It can also happen from a car accident. I know someone that happened to. Involved in a car accident, and the concussion caused brain damage, and literally they became somebody else. They had not only had to struggle with reading, writing, and arithmetic and all of that, but their personality was completely changed. They became somebody else. They didn't like any of the same things, they didn't want any of the same things, and they had a complete personality change, and they became somebody else. The person that they once were died, and they became somebody else. This next one is also very painful. Wonderful man, a farmer who rescued me, and who was a Métis, and he was able to figure out how to treat my disease, Parkinsonism, chemical hypersensitivities, allergies, immune deficiencies, and all of the above. He put me on moose meat. That's moose, the big animal in Canada. And I got strong very quickly. Within 6 weeks, I got very strong. And he had me outside in fresh air, and he made sure that I never got poisoned, and everything was homemade and all natural. And because it was homemade and grown in his own garden, or neighbors' gardens with no pesticides, you can call it organic, but it was just basically the old-fashioned way. That's all, the way my grandmother would have grown vegetables and stuff. And there was so many farms around the area that were strictly, the chickens were free range and grain fed and so on. It was just natural. They didn't call it organic. It was just the old-fashioned system. But in today's word, you call it organic. And we got engaged. We're going to get married, and I honestly have to tell you that not too many times in my life did I ever want to get married. My experience with my father did me enough damage that I wasn't really crazy about getting married. Pretty much had to drug me to get me married. And wedding, But this was different. It was the most beautiful, loving relationship I'd ever had, and very special. Anyway, one day I was holding my kitten up here in my arm, and he told me to go home, and he had both a farm and a house in a village, and he told me to go home to have a rest. He would make me get up early in the morning, make sure that I had something to eat that would not upset my stomach, because I wake up sick with nausea. That's part of my brain disorder and Parkinsonism. And then he would have me rest, and then he would have me exercise, and then he would have me rest. So he monitored me like a coach, literally. It was just amazing, what he did for me. And it was so special. Anyway, his eyes glazed over, and he stopped in the middle of a sentence. And he suddenly cursed and swore at me, grabbed my cat, killed the cat, killed all the kittens, and told me to get the F out of there. Screaming and cursing. And he hated me. And I left. And I tried to stay. I should have left right away, and I didn't. Because I just didn't want to believe this was happening. You go into shock. You don't want to believe this is happening. This wonderful, beautiful man that I was deeply, passionately in love with, I just didn't want to believe it was real. I didn't want to believe it was permanent. So I tried to stay, but it just got worse. And finally, my girlfriend, I called her, and she rescued me and moved me into Sudbury to my mother. And I had been planning to move to my mother before I had met this farmer, and then I was going to just commute back and forth from the village to my mother to help take care of my mother. But, and at the time, he was helping me with my mother too. He was just a wonderful, wonderful man. Anyway, he never became the same person. He hated me. He absolutely hated me. I don't know how love can go to hatred so fast, but that's what this personality disorder does. And I'm talking about not an episode, I'm talking permanent. A couple of years later, he married somebody else. And a few years after that, I got in touch with Dan, and we had been apart 12 years. We go back to 1985, so we've been together, 33 years or something, on and off. And he has fits of rage, but afterwards, he becomes the very caring and very loving and very remorseful. He has I call it an infantile inability to deal with anger. And he has a hair-trigger temper, and it's genetic, okay? And slowly over the years, he's worked really hard to control it and to come to terms with it and not let it destroy our relationship. And he really has done really well. It took 28 years, though. So, or 30. But he's worked at it, you see. Even he's antisocial, and he tries to be very social now with my friends, male friends and female friends, and he had to work at it. So those are skills that if he'd had a different parents, he would have learned as a child, because he never got that. So he, to maintain our relationship, he's worked at it, and we have a wonderful relationship, and I'm very lucky to have him in my life. And now the last one, the most recent, was my lawyer. And I have to describe to you the situation. I was going through losing our home. My brother had stolen the property rights, embezzled the estate funds. We were in debt and facing a public auction with the city on taxes. I had a tumor that triggered central nerve damage and set my disease back 30 years. I'd worked so hard, and I had gotten 100% well. I had 1 year out of my life. I was 72, and I had 1 year out of my life that I was 100% pain-free. I could run up the stairs. I was like a 5-year-old at 72. And it was diet and exercise, and with the help of Dan, and climbing and being in clean air and Capriole skiing and everything. Now, I haven't been able to get that back. I'm slowly working on it. I'm slowly improving, but I still take crippling attacks, and I don't have it completely under control. I've managed to move the tumor off the nerve, and I'm slowly repairing the nerve. And I did that through exercise. I have a girlfriend who is a licensed yoga instructor, and she helped me with certain exercises because this tumor cannot be moved. It's inside the muscle in my thigh, on the inside muscle, and I have to live with it. And it is slowly getting bigger, and eventually it'll kill me. But for now, it's moved off the nerve. The MRI showed it was off the nerve just 2 inches. But that's fine. 2 inches is a lot, to tell you the truth, compared to where it was. So it's amazing what you can do when you have a good doctor, which I have, Dr. Falcone and Dr. Sadie. God bless you. So that I understood what I had, and then I was able to learn how to deal with it, because it's not operative. I would bleed out. It's a parasitical fat cell tumor that's feeding off the blood, main artery, and if anybody had been foolish enough to go in to do a biopsy, I would have died in 10 seconds. I would have died. So anyhow, my life was a mess when I met Trent, and it was like I was meeting my grandson, kindred spirits. He was humanitarian. He wanted to fight the law that was criminal, that allowed for all this fraud and embezzlement and secret filing in the first place. He was beautiful. He had this soul, this heart, this spirit. He was magnificent. And I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. He was my hero. We were going to fight the Charter of Rights, and we were going to get the law changed, and he was going to help me get media, which meant that I not only would get the law changed, because through public exposure, I would embarrass and shame the government into banning a law that every other country on the planet had banned. It's a 2,000-year-old law that goes back to the time of the Romans, and its purpose is only to steal property. Why else would you want to file anything in secret? So he was just our hero. My mother was just delighted, and I had set aside a certain amount of the estate funds from the sale of the properties to be able to pay his fees. And I asked him to keep my money in trust, and he wouldn't do it. And then I was tricked out of the money, so I lost $190,000, and I never blamed him for that. He was young, and he didn't understand that sick, handicapped seniors sometimes need to be protected. And he just didn't understand that. But God is my witness. Not for a second did I ever mean for him to ever not be paid to do anything for free. He was young, he was in debt. I wouldn't do that. That's not who I am. But he was so gung-ho to do this. And I was just on another planet to have met somebody like him who was a kindred spirit and willing to do this. And then one day last summer, and I can't tell you the day exactly, it was either June or July, I'm not sure, because one minute we're going to get all this media and we're going to make history and when we're going to do all this, and in the very next breath, a day, two, a week later, I mean, it was that quick. Well, we're going to file with what we have and get it over with. And I said, what about the media? Well, you can get media if you want. Oh my God, not again. And I want to tell you, I tried not to go to hysterical, but I was upset. And when I'm upset, I talk loud. But I wasn't angry with him. I was scared. But it didn't matter. From that day on, he was somebody else. He was angry with me. He just wanted rid of me. And he did. Took a few months, but he terminated me and fired me. And he hates me. He blamed me for every anxiety attack or depression he ever had. And the truth is that he was going through hell in the courthouse. And I think he might have taken a mini stroke. Or I thought maybe medical marijuana did it. Or maybe some other drug did it. I mean, I was looking for reasons. But let me tell you, he's not the same person. And I lost not just my case, which was my life's work, and I made myself homeless deliberately because I'd run out of money. And so the only way for me to continue to pay his legal fees was I had to be homeless. So I moved in with Dan, and I couldn't afford to take money and rent an apartment. I wouldn't have enough money to pay legal fees. So that's how important this fight in banning secret filing was to me. I was supposed to buy a home, but when Doug McIsaac robbed me of my $190,000, tricked me out of the $190,000, well, I didn't have enough money to buy a home. And at my age, 76, I can't afford to carry a mortgage. I can't do that. So, okay, Dan's got an income, and with our two incomes together, maybe we could have done it. But I'm a sick person, and he's not that well either. He's had cancer. I can't take that risk. So I decided to give up all my prized possessions, which I gave to friends, give away over 100 gowns, cut back on my lifestyle, and move into a room in Dan's apartment. And he, God bless him, gave up his gym in the living room for my files, all my research files, and I've got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Well, I've got about 15 file drawers. Like, the whole wall is nothing but files. Actually, it's a wall and a half is nothing but files. So I'm stacked to the ceiling in the living room. And then to fit in what clothes I could salvage, because look, I'm a clothes horse, let's face it. I had a 4-bedroom house with my mother, and I kind of never left home. You know, I always had an apartment. I had another house in Toronto. I had had a cottage in Wasaga Beach. It didn't matter where I was. I still had a room at my mother's, and I always had a closet full of gowns and stuff. So, because I dress, make, and design, I haven't got the room to do that anymore, but I dress, make, and design my clothes. My ski outfits, jackets I buy, but the tights, a lot of my tights I make myself. I design my clothes. I design my hats. This is one of my little designs. I make jewelry. This one I didn't make, but I'll make jewelry. So it's just, you know, it's part of who I am. I'm a dancer, even though I take crippling attacks, and I'm a skier, cross-country, predominantly because I think downhill is boring. Any cripple can go up a hill in a chair and go down, which I was. But if I can get to my feet and I can climb, that's what I want to do. And I haven't succeeded yet this year, but twice. Capriol Mountains, my passion. I love Capriol. I love the people there. They're wonderful. So this sudden change in personality, the thing is that getting back to Trent, I kept hoping, I kept apologizing. I didn't know what I'd done wrong. And the truth is, I didn't do anything wrong. He got it in a bee in his bonnet, and he wanted rid of me, and he was just looking for reasons to find me at fault. Now, I'm handicapped. My mother died. I lost over $300,000. I spent $60,000 with him, $15,000 with another lawyer, and he didn't even have a split second's compassion for me. He accused me of criticizing a bill, a $10,000 bill. Yeah, the $10,000 upset me, all right. I didn't think that going after the government to get documents from Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan would cost that much. But I still wasn't mad at him. I was upset with the government. But you see, he had changed. And I just couldn't let it go. I couldn't believe that this man was so heartless and so unforgiving. Even if I had got mad at him, be a professional. I'm 76 years old. I'm handicapped. Cut me some slack. But no, he's not the same person. He's somebody else. The Trent I knew died. The Trent I loved died. And and he's never going to come back. I've been through this before. This is not an episode. It's not temporary. I have to move on. Moving on. I'm accepting the failure. I can't ever get the law changed. I can't go through with the Charter of Rights, fight on the Charter of Rights. It's over. And I've done everything I can. I've sent out hundreds of letters to members of Parliament and people all over Canada and attorney generals and every newspaper, every TV station, every radio station, you name it, I've done it. Nobody gives a shit. So, if Canadians don't care that we have a law that makes fraud and criminal behavior and property theft legal, and they don't give a damn, I have to let it go. Anyway, I just wanted to share that if somebody suddenly changes and becomes somebody else, they literally, that you have to accept and grieve the death of that person, they have died. And there's somebody else walking around in that body. They're not the same person. And you do have to grieve just as you would if it was a regular death. And you do have to move on, and you have to let go and let God, because there is nothing you can do. And the more you try, the harder you try, the worse it gets. Because you see, they hate you. They really do hate you. You're the enemy. And I think that's how some women and men wind up getting murdered. Because when that change happens, they don't want you around. Trent wanted to destroy me. He knew what that charter of rights meant to me, and I left him with $14,000. He could have finished it. But he wanted me dead. He wanted me destroyed. What better way to do it? And I did try to kill myself. Dan stopped me and locked me in my room for a couple of days until I calmed down. But, yeah. Sometimes someone you love becomes somebody else. And what you have to do is get out. Don't hang around. Accept it. They're dead. They're gone. And leave. Cut the relationship. Don't ever try to go back. I've made that mistake. Not saying my relationship with Trent could have been salvaged, but I saw it coming. And when it changed, I should have ended it. I should have ended it. I don't care about the money I would have saved, but at least I would have walked away with perhaps less hatred. Or maybe not, but it wouldn't have been as bad. But instead I hung in there, and I hung in there, and I hung in there, and I put myself through such torture. So, if anybody has a similar story, I'd sure like to hear about it. Because right now I'm feeling like, why me? So many times this has happened to me in my life. What am I doing wrong? I don't know. Anyway, maybe by sharing it will help you get past what you have to get past, because you do have to get past it. They're dead. And that body is somebody else. And it's never going to be the same, and they're never going to come back. And if you're going through it, by all means, connect with me. You know the old saying, united we shall conquer, divided we fail. But it's a very painful process. And God bless all of you who have stood by me through thick and thin, who've given me the right to be angry. That's what love is, you see. The people who care about me and truly do love me, they allow me to be angry. They allow me to scream and rant and rave once in a while and get hysterical, because I'm going through hell. And they love me just the same. And maybe I don't talk to them every day, and I withdraw and I go into a hole of depression. They allow me the privilege of that too, you see. It's unconditional love, and I am very fortunate. I have that with Dan. I have that with Jill, and Brian, and Len, and Diane, and Helen, and Francine, just to mention my closest, dearest friends. I'm very, very lucky. And thank you for listening. God bless.